Here we are back again for another Around the Table discussion. I'm Walter Fields, executive editor of NorthstarNews.com, coming from the nation's capital.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Rob Tarver, and I'm the general counsel for NorthstarNews.com.
Since our last conversation, a lot has been going on, and we're not going to spend all of our time talking about the Trump investigation. But I think the raid on his Mar-a-Lago resort was very significant and very historic. The fact that this is the first time that a former president of the United States has been subjected to a raid by the FBI. So just give me your thoughts on number one, um, the context of the raid, and perhaps explain a little about how these raids take place, because I think a lot of people are under the assumption that, the FBI just gets a warrant and they go in and they raid a premises, but it's much more complex and complicated than that.
Yeah, you know what? It's complex, but it's also very simple. And it behooves the Trump camp to make it complex. But here's how simple it really is. When the FBI or when the Department of Justice, which supersedes and runs the FBI, makes a determination that a law is being broken and that there's information that they need in a particular place, they then put together what's called an affidavit. And that's a signed document under oath to take to a judge. They take it to the judge reviews it, and it's not the prosecutor, the DOJ, or the Department of Justice or the FBI who decides that a warrant can issue. It is a federal magistrate or a federal judge who decides, yes, there's enough information. Judge has to just decide this, whether or not the affidavit states with particularity the things to be seized and why they're going to be seized. And number two, takes the location of where those things are. And if a judge looks at it and says, yeah, it looks like the law is being broken here based upon what somebody swore, that's it. That's how the warrant gets issued. The search warrant gets issued. Now, in this particular case, that's exactly what happened. The DOJ, through the FBI, went to the federal court in Florida, where Mar-a-Lago is, because these boxes of information, and this is what's unprecedented. Everyone says that this action on Donald Trump is unprecedented. Well, it's unprecedented that a sitting president, a former president, would actually remove information, some of which is classified and classified as top secret. And there's really no dispute over whether or not some of the information is classified and is top secret, would actually remove that information and take it home with him. All right. He lives in Mar-a-Lago. This is not a secured compound. He lives at Mar-a-Lago. So he basically just took all that stuff home. And the question is really whether or not, number one, whether or not a crime was committed as a result of this. And the crime being alleged by the FBI and the Department of Justice is that he willfully took and concealed documents that he should not have. And he violated what is called the Espionage Act of 1918, which is basically that the act was founded in the middle of World War I, and it basically says that you cannot use any information that you have, or you cannot have information or disseminate information or keep information that is dangerous to the security interests of the United States. And the last thing he's charged with is obstruction of justice. Now, the reason those charges come to fruition is simply this. Apparently, the DOJ has been asking Donald Trump for a period of time, can we have these documents back? They're not yours. They belong to the United States government. So we want these documents back. And apparently, Donald Trump has resisted in some way. And that's how we know that there's some resisting, because they're actually charging here, as I said, the obstruction. And the obstruction is that you stood in the way somehow of a governmental function. So that's the nuts and bolts of how this thing happened. It's very simple. It happens all the time, every day in criminal courts. I have, as a prosecutor, Walter, I've actually put together these affidavits. I've actually taken them to judges. I've actually moved forward with these search warrants. And as a defense attorney, I've actually defended them as well.
And at the root of all of this, folks need to understand that there is a Presidential Records Act that was passed in the late 1970s. It was really passed because of the Watergate scandal, which requires every United States president to hand over any documents, classified or not classified, to the National Archives, because these documents are not the personal possession of the individual who happens to be president. They are owned by the United States government, and they're supposed to be preserved for historical posterity. And so, what this president, former president, did was he removed documents that should have been turned over. And let me say this also. One of the comebacks from the Trump folks was that, well, Barack Obama did the same thing. No, Barack Obama did not. What Barack Obama did was he turned over information to the National Archives so that they can archive it. Now, the National Archives can then turn around and say, we can loan this document to you if it wants to. But these records should be in the possession of our National Archives. And Donald Trump, at the end of his term, just simply removed materials from the White House to Mar-a-Lago. And as you said, Mar-a-Lago is not a secure facility. It's not Camp David,
Mhm.
that's secure. It is a private residence. And so this former president had documents that were the property of the United States government in his private home. And people need to understand the importance of this, because none of us know what the documents are. But clearly, the Department of Justice was so alarmed and had tried to negotiate with Donald Trump to get these documents that they felt compelled to seek um, a warrant to, search his property. And once they do that, you have to understand that there is something there that is so sensitive. It could be something related to the military, it could be something related to US intelligence. And if those documents get in the wrong hands, they could endanger the lives of individuals in the United States, or they could be used as blackmail.
And
And so,
here's what's really troubling about it. No one is asking the seminal question here. Why does he have those documents? What is he going to do with them? Why would you remove documents that impact national security, that are historical, that belong to the United States government? Why do you have them? What are you going to do with them? And that's something that none of his followers want to confront, because there is no good answer for that. There's no good answer for that that takes it out of the realm of selfishness or self-profit. And that's what we've seen for this guy all along.
and it's par for the course in Trump's abuse of power. This is an individual who never respected law, who never respected the United States government. So he behaved as he has always behaved. But this time he was called on the carpet,
Mhm.
because this is a very serious offense. And this is an offense that is serious enough to bring a criminal charge and to have this person imprisoned. And people need to understand how serious this is. Look,
Many of
we
the charges
all
carry 20 and 30 years as a base
absolutely,
maximum
and
sentence.
we all have our issues with the United States, in terms of what the government does and doesn't do. But the fact of the matter is that whatever security we have in this country right now is because there's some degree of secrecy. And when that secrecy is broken, particularly at the highest levels, that's when the lives of Americans potentially could be jeopardized. Because there are always actors out there in the world who will do anything, particularly those countries that deem themselves enemies of the United States, who will do anything to get their hands on information that could perhaps injure or harm this nation or citizens of this nation.
Yeah.
So that's why this becomes a very serious matter.
Yeah.
But we're going to turn the page on this, because there's this other issue going on. So the Republican Party, conservative Republicans, have actively sought very um, right wing black candidates to seek office. Candidates who don't have a history in our community, candidates that express a world view that is diametrically opposed to the sentiments of most Black Americans in this country. And I also want to say that this is not a knock on Black Republicans. There is a rich history of Black Republicans in this country. Frederick Douglass, Benjamin Hooks, first Black FCC chairman, first Black criminal court judge in Tennessee. You
Ed
have people like the legendary Bill Coleman, Secretary of Transportation, who helped write the Brown brief with the NAACP. You had Reverend Martin Luther King Sr. You had someone from our state who was actually a friend of my family, E. Frederick Morrow, who was the first Black person to serve in the executive office of the president under Dwight D. Eisenhower. So this is not a knock on Black people who are Republicans. This is a knock on the idiots who the Republican Party now parades out as being sort of representative of a different Black perspective. People like Herschel Walker, who is a walking case of stupidity in Georgia, and who I hope Georgia voters, Black and white, reject. This man has no business being a candidate. You have the lieutenant governor of Virginia, Winsome Sears, who posed with an automatic rifle in her campaign literature. These are the type of Black people that Republicans are now using as sort of a race shield to say, oh, we're not racist because we have this candidate who is Black. And these are nothing more than Negro test dummies for the Republican Party. And so, you've witnessed it because we've often had phone conversations when we've seen something pop up on social media by one of these fools. And today, the New York Times has a full page article, front page, that really talks about how they're trying to basically steal the notion of the American dream and turning it on its head. So, what do you think is going to come of this new narrative that right wing, conservatives are putting forth about our community?
This really takes me back because it's interesting because sometimes you can find some very rich gems in comedy. You remember Richard Pryor did this little skit and this bit he
Oh,
did
yes,
about white people recruiting new niggers. And, I'm gonna use
yes,
the word
yes.
because that was the point of the comedy that they're gonna get them some new niggers, because they don't need us anymore. And that's what I believe we're starting to see. And in all seriousness, what has happened in some very devious contexts, they have decided to deputize these people of color, Black people, Latinos, uh, even Asians, to do their dirty work for them. Because as long as they are the face of this so-called, and I don't even want to call it conservatism because it's not conservatism anymore. It really is white supremacy, cloaked white supremacy. As long as they are the face of this cloaked white supremacy, it makes it very difficult for people to argue against it in a number of ways. And they believe it adds some validity to the fact that Black people are really not in the position that they're in because of anything that's happened historically, or Black people are lazy, or Black people are consumers of welfare, or Black people are hyper violent, because you have now people of color saying so. And basically they are evaluating their own community. And here's what I believe is the real problem. For us as Black people, we face a very difficult problem because most of the people who are amplifying these ultra conservative and, quite frankly, white supremacist themes are immigrant Black people. They are Caribbean immigrants. They are African immigrants. They are people who have not gone through the same experience in America that we as Black Americans have. Now, that's not a knock on them, but they have a different perspective. There's a different perspective, I believe, in many Caribbean people in terms of how they look at American Blacks, how they look at our survival through both the slavery experience and the post-slavery Jim Crow experience, and how they have bought into the idea that we as American Blacks are where we are because we choose to be that way.
And let's also be clear, some of it is because they've just picked some very stupid people. I mean, when you look at Herschel Walker, you know, it is just very offensive to me that any political party could seriously nominate Herschel Walker to be their candidate for the United States Senate. Herschel Walker is a buffoon. This is a man who obviously has some serious personal problems.
Mhm.
And this is the person that the Georgia Republican Party is embracing and trying to convince the black community in Georgia that simply because he was a star football player for the University of Georgia, that we should pull the lever for Herschel Walker.
Yeah, but
And I know
remember, he wasn't he also a valedictorian of his class, and doesn't he
well, he
also
was the
doesn't he
top of
also
his
have a
class.
company that's 5.7 million or $57 million in assets? And
And you know something? I hate to sound like Laura Ingraham right now, but some folks should stick to what they know and stay in their lane.
well, he does have a chicken corporation, I heard. So
He does. This is not a knock on athletes who enter the realm of politics, because we have had them before, and they have been great public servants. But we have to draw the line as a community that any black will not do. Like, when we allow a Herschel Walker to be tagged as representative of our community, it truly is white supremacy in blackface. It is a mockery of all the hard work and struggle and suffering that as a community we've endured to not only gain the right to vote, but to gain the right to run for public office. I sincerely hope people in Georgia will come out strong for Senator Warnock and clean Herschel Walker's clock, because he's an embarrassment. This is a man who refuses to debate Senator Warnock, who gives the most insane answers to what are pretty much straightforward questions, like things like climate change, where he's talking about China sent over their bad air over the United States. I mean, how, you know, I hate to use the word stupid, because I know my mom's looking down from heaven, and that's one word that we were not allowed to use in our house
well, let
as
me use it
children.
for you. Stupid. You know,
Thank you.
I don't know that there's any other way to describe, Herschel Walker. I mean, and the problem is his candidacy is not just based in stupidity. It is based in being a serial liar, which he is. He is a womanizer. He is an abuser. He's a person who pulled a gun on his ex-wife and was going to blow her head off. And the Republican Party has decided that this man at this time would be their standard bearer. Now they
An
did
ex-wife and an ex-wife who has run a campaign ad now
this.
against Herschel Walker. Like,
Yes.
it doesn't get any more absurd than what you see happening in the southern states, where conservative Republicans have calculated that all we need is a black face who will echo what we want them to say. We will tie it to some pseudo religiosity, because that's the other thing Herschel Walker always falls back on, this sort of simple minded, I'm a country boy who was raised in a small town who believes in God.
Yeah.
And it is a dangerous thing in this country right now, the way religion, specifically Christianity, is being used to advance this very evil agenda.
It's extremely,
And
it's extremely dangerous. And I mean, look, those of you who believe in the Bible and have read the Bible know that it tells you that you should try the spirit by the spirit, and you should try the person's acts by what they say. Don't go by what they say, go by what they do. And every one of Herschel Walker's historical foundations and acts has been rooted in something other than Christianity. It's almost like Satanism, but the fact of the matter is that there is not a Christian foundation anywhere that you could point to in his history. And as you say, this is a dangerous, dangerous trend, because now what they've done is the ultra right side has done exactly what they accused Islamic Americans and Arabic Americans of doing, which is running their governmental functions through their religion. And the First Amendment tells you, it's in the Constitution. The First Amendment, you will make no, you're not going to make any laws that abridge religion. And that basically on the other side means that you're not going to make any laws that establish religion.
And the truth of the matter is the Constitution doesn't even matter to these folks. I mean, we see that in Texas now. We have a law that every school has to have a poster that has "In God We Trust" in the school building. I mean, the fact that they have just completely obliterated the line between church and state and are justifying it on the basis of we are sort of defending the American dream is really an insult to everyone's intelligence. And I think when you start seeing how conservative Republicans are attempting to flip the script and manipulate black and brown people in this very sinister way by recruiting these type of candidates, because they know there is one thing that is certain in black and brown communities. Because of our history, we have a difficult time critiquing people that look like us. We saw that during the Clarence Thomas confirmation hearings before the Senate Judiciary Committee. Part of the reason why Clarence Thomas got over was because there was this hesitancy on the part of black people to criticize Clarence Thomas, because we all know that historically that critique has always come from whites in terms of blocking opportunity. So we never want to be seen as the people who are blocking opportunity for people who look like us. But we've got to lose that thing, because now we're at a point in time where we're going to turn around and the people who are going to be elected to Congress are going to be these reactionary, fascist black Republicans, because we were silent and we didn't want to criticize folks or call them out when we should have. And so we're in a period that we got to start calling some folks out,
Yeah, yeah, we
because if Herschel Walker becomes the United States Senator from Georgia, he will do grave damage to black people and black children all throughout this country.
And the reason he'll do grave damage is not because he knows how to do grave damage or that he has any particular agenda. He will be run by some right wing entity, right wing person. He's basically just going to be a mouthpiece for somebody else. He's not equipped to be able to handle the Senate of the United States. And that's what's so incredibly crazy here. The fact that you could just lose all of your integrity as a party and say that we're willing to vest everything in a person that we know is so obviously unqualified. And it also ties into this other thing what we've always talked about, which is trying to devalue intellectualism. The whole idea that you want to put down the idea that someone has actually prepared for a position, that someone is intellectually prepared for a position, that they've gone through not just the intellectual preparation, but they've done the work and they put the time in that allows them to really be qualified for the position. I dare somebody to stand up and say that Herschel Walker is in any way qualified for anything other than running the ball. And, you know, he has a pretty good MMA career right now too, but that's it. And we
And
need to
and
really call these people out.
and here's the other thing, because the pushback is always on the sort of partisan scale. So on the Republican side, the pushback is, well, Democrats have been using black folks for decades. Here's the difference. If you look at the history of Democrats who have run for office, Democrats who have been elected to office, regardless of the shortcomings of that party, we have a history of black people who, once they are elected as Democrats in Congress, have fought hard to expand the rights of African Americans, have fought for civil rights, for voting rights, to end housing discrimination, to end private sector labor market discrimination, to make sure that schools are integrated. There is a marked difference between what we have seen with Democrats black Democrats who run for office, particularly since the era of Franklin D. Roosevelt post the New Deal, right? And what we are now seeing in these black faces that the Republican Party has put up. And as I said earlier, there have been some dynamic Black Republicans who, in the past, have fought hard for civil rights. Ed Brooke from Massachusetts,
Mhm.
the first Black senator since Reconstruction, Black Republican who supported civil rights. I was at the Republican National Convention, I believe it was 2000, when Colin Powell stood before that convention and supported affirmative action and was booed
Right.
by Republican delegates.
Mhm.
This was a man who was revered, who had worked for Republicans and Democratic administrations. And the minute he got to the lectern and said, I support affirmative action, the Republican Party should be behind affirmative action, he was booed. The Republican Party today is not the party of Lincoln. It's not even the party of Richard Nixon. People forget Richard Nixon, for all of his faults. Richard Nixon is a president who signed Title IX into law,
That's right.
making sure that girls and young women would have equal opportunity in scholastic and intercollegiate athletics. Richard Nixon supported the creation of the Environmental Protection Agency. Like, this Republican Party is so
Richard
far
Nixon
removed.
championed the community action programs that so many of us basically, have worked through over the years.
Absolutely. So for all of his faults, and they were huge, this Republican Party is not even close to the Republican Party of Richard Nixon, which is scary.
Yeah.
This Republican Party is not a Republican Party. It is a Trump party.
This Republican
And
Party makes makes Ronald Reagan look liberal. That's
well,
what that.
absolutely. Absolutely. And because they have taken the covers off of white supremacy and we're seeing it in full view now. And now you have Black people who they are selecting as candidates who are echoing the same narrative as these reactionary white supremacist right-wing Republicans. And these are the people that they are hoisting upon us because they don't want to do the damage themselves. They want someone with a Black and brown face to do the damage. And what you talked about in terms of immigrant candidates is real. So one of the challenges we have in the diaspora is that we all have different experiences with oppression.
Right.
Colonialism was huge in the Caribbean. And so you have Black people who don't understand the history of discrimination and racism in the United States and the effect of white supremacy that's rooted from the enslavement of Africans, because that was not their history in the Caribbean.
Sure.
Certainly there was enslavement, but they did not endure this structured system of Jim Crow or the Black codes as we did on the mainland. So you
Precisely.
have people who come over and their worldview is certainly Afrocentric, but it is a some conservatism that's based upon colonialism. And now we are confronted with these individuals being used as sort of poster children for Black America.
And even both the Caribbean and the African experiences with colonialism, they began a period of self-governance far earlier than we did. And I don't even know if you can even call our experience self-governance, because we've been able to govern ourselves in certain urban areas. But they had historical um, governance over their territories, over their nations. Although it was either veiled colonialism or corrupt in many ways. And that's how their experience has been shaped. So that's what we have to really keep in mind. We have to begin to, I think, separate those ideas of what their experiences are from the experiences of America. And we really need to start educating a little bit more. Part of the problem here, Walter, from my perspective, is our lack of education here, a lack of education of the history of America, of Black people in America, as well as the history of other people in the diaspora, because it behooves white America to separate us based upon that experience.
Absolutely. And it really goes to show you how the transatlantic slave trade just did a number on black skinned folks. I
Hmm.
mean, it was such a wicked system. The fact that you could have this system that separated black people, deposited them throughout the country, throughout the world, put them under different aspects of oppression. And now we're at a point where, as a people, we have to find our common footing, right? Like Africa and the Caribbean, we don't understand, right? They don't understand our struggle. And as you said, part of this is the education that has to take place. I've traveled to the Caribbean. I've been to Africa about 2 dozen times. And what is heartbreaking is that you sense we don't understand each other.
Yeah.
And
Part of the issue is they believe they understand us. We're pretty clear that we don't understand them.
yeah, I mean, I think that more and more we're growing into um, a better understanding of Africa,
Mhm.
and particularly sub-Saharan Africa. But we are still subject to being manipulated because our history has been so twisted that, and you even hear this, and I don't want to lay this all on Caribbean folks or Africans, because you even hear this from so-called African Americans when you hear people almost justify slavery by saying, well, we sold each other into slavery without even understanding the extent of how that happened in Africa.
Right.
And it really points to this just lack of understanding, which always comes back and really harms us in the most significant ways. And now we're at a point that because we are a diminishing minority in the United States, at one time we had some political leverage because we could say we are the largest minority group in the United States. That's no longer the case, right? So Latin Americans are a larger minority, and at some point we may be surpassed by the Asian American community. So our real leverage will come, I believe, from creating this broader connection to our brothers and sisters throughout the world. But that's going to take a lot of work.
And that's the difficulty, because in order to make that connection, there has to be some common ground. And unless we can establish and create this common ground, that's not going to happen. People like Sears and others are basically taking away that common ground. They are basically saying, no, we're more like them than we are like you. And that presents a huge problem. But I'm not going to be silent in this whole thing. I'm not going to. I was watching the movie Django the other day, and I watched I watched Samuel L. Jackson play his Stephen character. So, I'm not going to accept the Stevenization of these political figures. We're going to have to call them out where they are. So, yeah, Sears is a Stephen, a female Stephen. Herschel Walker, well, he's just Stephen.
Right?
So,
Exactly.
and we have to be real about where these people are coming from. They are tools of a white supremacist system unknowingly. Some of them knowingly. Look, Ben Carson and others, quite frankly, Herman Cain. Look how we got here over the years by the use of these different people to put us in this particular position at this time.
Look, some of these folks are not only willing, but they're complicit.
Yeah.
And I think, if you want to talk about tragedy, you just mentioned the name. That's a true tragedy, Herman Cain.
Yeah.
This is a black man who had made his mark in the private sector. He was seen as an industry leader. He embraces Trumpism, all the falsehoods of Trumpism, and he ends up dying from a condition
The ultimate,
that,
the ultimate
yeah,
falsehood, right?
yes, the ultimate falsehood about COVID-19. Herman Cain dies, and his name is never mentioned again by Donald Trump. It's almost as if, and this is where you have to really appreciate how evil these folks are. Herman Cain put his reputation on the line for Donald Trump. Herman Cain was a victim of Donald Trump's lies
Mhm.
about COVID-19. He dies. He's not mentioned. He's not referenced. He's not even memorialized by Donald Trump. And so you see that these people are soulless. I mean, Donald Trump just lost one of his ex wives and buried her on a golf course in New Jersey. That sort of tells you who these people are.
Yeah. Ben
And,
Carson.
and
I have to keep going back to Ben Carson. Ben Carson was revered, incredibly intelligent, groundbreaking, revolutionary. Who is he now? He sold himself to Donald Trump, and now his reputation is in tatters. No one even speaks of him anymore. He's dropped
no,
off the mat completely. He's been used and thrown out.
and that is a pattern of Donald Trump with everybody he surrounds himself with, but particularly black people that he surrounds himself with,
Mhm.
because he will deep six a black person in a heartbeat after he gets what he needs out of it. He gets the photo op, he gets the attention, he gets the praise of his so-called leadership and intellectual abilities, and then you see people just casually discard
Kicked him out the
it.
door. Kicked
Oh,
him.
without a doubt, without a doubt.
You know
But
what? I'm
look,
going
man.
to tease something. Let me just tease something because we're getting ready to go. Because one of the biggest factors here is now we've talked about needing to have education behind all this.
Mm,
See what's happening in Texas and in Florida, where they are literally rewriting history to suggest that the transatlantic slave trade was about something it wasn't, to suggest that it wasn't so bad, to suggest that there was some sort of collective partnership between slaves and slave masters. And that's something that we've got to deal with because that's one of the biggest threats to our existence in America as Black people.
well, actually, there's a full-scale assault on public education today. As you see, I'm wearing my HBCU Matters shirt with my Morgan State Bear logo because we have to have a full understanding of why education is the foundation of our survival.
We've got to talk
And
about
if we don't talk about that, we really be irresponsible. So the next around the table discussion, we're going to focus solely on the attack on public education because that is a war that is going on right now. It's not going on in Washington, D.C., it's going on in state capitals and in your local community and local boards of education. If you don't understand what's going on in that fight, our children are going to be sacrificed. So until next time, this is Walter Fields, executive editor of NorthstarNews.com, and we encourage you to visit our site.
it. And this is Rob Tarver. You all be safe.